Hey, this is Greg from the Classical Ideas Podcast. On Friday, November 29th, 2019, Dr. Liz Bucar from Northeastern University was visiting family in Buffalo, New York, and stopped by my house to discuss her research. We recorded this on Dr. Bucar's birthday, which is also Black Friday. She showed up at my house with interview questions prepared for me and surprised me by starting our time together by turning the interview tables on me for a little while. A little bit about her. Dr. Bucar is a religious ethicist who studies sexuality, gender, and moral transformation within Islamic and Christian traditions and communities. She is the author of 3 books, including the award-winning Pious Fashion, How Muslim Women Dress from Harvard University Press, whose paperback edition is out now. Her upcoming interview episode with me discusses pious fashion at length, and it's a great conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. At Northeastern, Dr. Bucar teaches courses on sexual ethics, Islam, the politics of the veil, and more. Her public scholarship has appeared in The Atlantic, The Los Angeles Times, and Teen Vogue. So I have a full episode coming soon on her scholarship, including her public scholarship. But since we recorded this discussion where she turned the interview tables on me, we wanted to do a Black Friday birthday bonus podcast. Enjoy.
So, hi, Classical Ideas Podcast listeners. I'm Liz Bucar, Professor of Religion at Northeastern, and I'm about to be interviewed with your usual host, Greg Soden. Am I saying it right?
You are, thank you.
Okay, Soden, great. But before I let Greg bombard me with questions, I thought I'd turn the table on him a bit and ask him a few questions myself. So, Greg, let's let your listeners learn a little bit about you.
Fantastic.
All right, great. So we're actually recording in your home office here, right? Here in Amherst near Buffalo. So we are in Classical Ideas Podcast headquarters, right?
This is totally true. And no one's ever been here before. You're the only person who's ever been on the show who's actually been in my actual house.
Oh, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, and the reason I am here is that my in-laws live, a mile away from you?
Less. I mean, it's like 0.7 mile away.
So this is the day after Thanksgiving. I'm in town for the holiday, and we are recording on Friday.
Black Friday.
Black Friday. Oh, yes. Instead of shopping, we're recording.
This is the best thing that we could do instead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We are 100% committed to public scholarship on religion, even on Black Friday.
Absolutely.
So since we're sitting here, we're going to call it Buffalo. So we're here in your home office. Tell me a little bit about, so my in-laws are, my partner was raised here. My sister-in-law moved back here. So are you like a Buffalo born and raised? Because I know people are really committed to Buffalo. Tell me about why you're in Buffalo.
So we had the opportunity to move to Buffalo for my spouse's job in 2018. And we used to live in Columbia, Missouri, a few miles from Mizzou, if anybody's familiar with the Mizzou campus in the middle of Missouri, halfway between Kansas City and St. Louis. And I'm very open to new opportunities in the world. Like I grew up in St. Louis in the suburbs, went to Mizzou for my undergrad, and then right out of Mizzou, I moved to Hawaii to work at Camp Erdman, the YMCA camp where Lost was filmed, actually.
Oh, very cool.
So I lived where those yellow houses in Lost are. Those are actually camper cabins for a summer camp.
Okay, that's kind of creepy.
I know. So the Others Village in the TV show Lost, I actually slept in those for 2 summers. And with campers, it's like a day camp. And after Hawaii, I moved to Mexico, and I did my first year of teaching in central Mexico, like 7 hours south of El Paso, Texas. And then after that, I moved to the London, England suburbs and taught history in a high school, like a huge public high school in England. After that, did a master's in Saskatchewan, in the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, which was awesome. And then I moved back to Columbia, Missouri, to do a PhD at Mizzou in social studies education, but met my wife, fell in love, had our daughter. I realized that academia per se was not for me right before I did my comps. So I bailed and went to teach 10th grade English and 12th grade religious studies at a public high school in the middle of Missouri. But I was always like super open to travel And so like whenever this opportunity to move to Buffalo came up, I was like super into it because I love Canada, did my master's there. So I'm like,
we're basically in Canada.
I know
right now.
we are north of parts of Canada right now, which is amazing. I go to Canada for no reason all the time.
Yeah.
So I love Buffalo because it's affordable. It's next to Canada. There's no traffic. I like winter. Like,
yeah. So we are here on this is a beautiful day in Buffalo, right? Very typical. It's freezing cold, very gray, which makes it feel even colder.
Yep.
Right? And the snow is coming. We're going to snow tomorrow, I think, right?
Well, and we had 11 inches of snow about a week and a half ago, and then it melted.
Which would be early November, 11.5 inches.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it doesn't play here. But, like parts of Montana have already gotten like 40 or 50 inches for the season. So, like Buffalo, it doesn't snow nearly as often as people think. So people are afraid of Buffalo, which we kind of like here because that means fewer people will move here and clog up our highways.
Yes. Okay. So you're not born and raised. You're interesting.
No.
So tell me a little bit about the Park School, which is where you work. I know a little bit about it because it's a pretty important institution in the area. But
yeah, so I teach English at a school called the Park School. I teach middle school English over there.
Middle school. Okay.
Yeah. And so this is my first foray into middle school. I was a high school teacher before that, but this opportunity came up to teach at this school, and I'm only part-time. I just teach in the mornings, but and it is a 100-plus-year-old progressive school, and has a long history. The campus is extremely beautiful, many, many acres of forested hills and rolling hills and like a pond. The central building on the campus is called the Hamlin Estate, which was owned by a gentleman in Western New York named Chauncey Hamlin. And it's an old hunting lodge. And there's a lot of history around it with the Underground Railroad and with, Theodore Roosevelt, like visiting and things like that. So it's a really intriguing place, but I really like teaching there so far.
Yeah, what a cool place to be. I'm saying that I have a sixth grader, right now. My daughter's in sixth grade. So I'm thinking about how cool it would be to be talking about those times of history in those facilities, right, on that campus.
Totally. I mean, so the head of the school is very into learning about the local history of the institution and the property itself. Like he has a lot of he's doing a lot of research on like Native American walking trails and trade trails and paths and things like that.
So cool.
In the area. So it's a really interesting place. And I know that John Dewey was once associated with the institution, like on the board of the school itself. So apparently there's a lot of history as far as like progressive education in the U.S. being focused at the Park School.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So then tell us a little bit about why a podcast and why this podcast, right? So why Classical Ideas? Because I have to confess, I thought when I first saw Classical Ideas, and I know Greg from the Twitter world.
Yeah,
I know
Twitter.
Him, yes, I'm not extremely online, but I'm trying very hard. And actually, when I first saw you in my feed, I was like, what is this podcast about? The classics, about Latin. I mean, I actually didn't know it was about religion, right? So why this particular topic and why a podcast?
So this podcast, which has now been going for 2.5 years or so, started when I was still teaching at my old school in Columbia, Missouri. And in this Columbia Public Schools, we have this 30-plus year religious studies class for upperclassmen in high school. And the class is called Classical Ideas and World Religions.
Oh, okay.
So this is a course that was founded in the late 80s. And if anybody wants to know the history of how the class was actually founded, they can listen to episode 2 of the podcast, which is an interview with the guy who started the class in the 1980s, who was my teaching mentor, who helped me realize how you set up and teach a year of academic religious studies to high school students.
Oh, very cool.
So the history of the class goes back to the 80s, and he named it Classical Ideas and World Religions in 1989 or 88 or something like that. And so when I started the podcast, I meant to do it as a complimentary resource for parents of the students, because what I would do in the class is I would have a lot of guest speakers come in every year. And when the guest speakers would come in, the students would get this really awesome one-on-one experience with these experts, researchers, journalists, practitioners, what have you, from 20-plus traditions around the world. And then what I would do is interview that guest speaker to be a guest on the podcast. So the students would get the one-on-one interaction with the guest, and then the parents could download the podcast, and then they could talk about it over dinner.
Oh, that's so cool. Because I know I send home my students, I feel like, with bombs over Thanksgiving vacation. I know that a couple who are going to be like, Mom, you shouldn't do yoga because it's cultural appropriation this year. Or, or if they take my veil class, I show up for Thanksgiving dinner wearing veil for the day as part of my experience, like performance. Like, they really mess with their parents and their parents don't know what's going on. So that's great to have the complimentary piece with it.
I had very similar experiences where I would go home and like talk about Howard Zinn or something, and it was interesting. But like,
and do you have parents who were listening to it? Do you feel like was it doing the work you wanted it to do?
I felt like yes. And it kind of got like a little bit of local notoriety in Columbia, Missouri. Like a local radio station picked it up and aired the show every Wednesday after Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman.
Oh, wow.
So like for over a year and a half now, the show has aired every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., immediately following Democracy Now! So I know there's like a little local following still for it, and the show was featured on the front page of the town newspaper. So that was pretty cool. But the show began just as a class project. And then it kind of shifted in like the episode number 20s when publicists started kind of poking around and emailing me saying, hey, do you want to interview this person who wrote this book? And I'm like, sure, how do I do that? And they're like, we'll download this call recorder. And so it kind of went from being a local Columbia, Missouri thing to being a bigger thing that has now gone into episode number 140, I think is the latest episode.
That's a lot.
I know. So it's like if you listen to the first 20 or so episodes, those are all mostly personal friends of mine. And then beyond that are like people such as yourself that just kind of
show up after Thanksgiving dinner.
Are in the world. I love it. Yeah.
So that's so interesting. There's so much talk right now about religious literacy and how we create that, and the kind of lack of it, and the lack of sort of sophisticated conversation about religion. So in some ways, your podcast is doing that work too, right? Or can be doing more that work, if we're doing a good job anyway, if you have someone like me on, I'm able to translate my academic book. We'll see what happens after this. Then you're able to have that conversation with students, parents, or my mom or whoever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the reason I think this show continues to interest me is because it's never boring for me. Mm-hmm. Like we're about to talk about your book and fashion choices of Muslim women around the world in different countries is like just very interesting to me because it's something that I know nothing about, So every time I think that, I've reached the end of the show kind of thing, like a new idea will come at me and I'm like, well, I really should do an episode about that. So the intrigue just keeps hitting me, So the motivation to keep going just keeps coming at me whenever these new topics arrive, So like just when I think I'm done, I'll get like 5 new books. I'm like, oh man, that looks so cool, and like I'll want to do that too. So
yeah. So tell people who are listening, what's the best way to sort of follow the work that you're doing and to support the podcast and support you?
Well, if you follow me on Twitter, like I'm super engaged on Twitter.
He's very engaged on Twitter.
I love it. And so my Twitter handle is @classical_ideas. I'm unverified. So
I don't think anyone gets verified anymore.
I know,
think that's
it's ridiculous.
Over. You don't need to be verified. Unverified is the new verified. It's the new cool.
Yeah. So, and the artwork of my Twitter is the artwork for the shows. So then if you go on iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or any of the podcast apps and you search Classical Ideas, I pop right up. It gets a little bit of exposure because I interviewed the 2 eldest daughters of Alan Watts, like ages ago, 100+ episodes ago, but those 2 episodes still turn up whenever you search for Alan Watts on iTunes. So a lot of my traffic comes from these 2 episodes that I did with Ann and Joan Watts for episodes 32 and 33.
Very cool. And I'm actually not in the podcast space other than someone who gets interviewed on podcasts quite a bit. So tell me, is it like more helpful for listeners to subscribe and download? Like, how does it work from your end? What's sort of helpful in terms of supporting?
So if you if you want to know about the show, so with so many episodes now, if you reach out directly to me, like on Twitter or on my Facebook, my Classical Ideas Facebook page, I will kind of tailor the listening experience to people who want to check out episodes of the show.
So like your curator list, if I say, hey, I'm teaching a class on American religions, what do you got?
For sure.
Oh,
yep.
nice.
Like if you're like, I'm a teacher, and I will send you the episode numbers and links for all my episodes with teachers and people who are specialists in education. If you are like, hey, I'm a journalist, I will send you all my episodes that are tailored to covering religion in the journalism world. If you are like, hey, I really want to know about Japanese Shinto because I am going on a trip and I want to learn about how to visit temples, I'll send you specific episode numbers. So if you reach out to me and you engage with me, that's one of the things I'm trying to promote more is more listener engagement with me. Because I feel like that would build the community a little better. Mm-hmm. So if you want to know specific episode numbers, I can tell you exactly where to go. And so that would be awesome. I also have a Patreon if you want to give me money. It's patreon.com/classical ideas podcast. And if you $1 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever, it helps me because I have to buy gear and
we're using these like big fancy, I don't know, microphones right now.
Yeah, and it's like the little stuff too, like I've got these XLR cables that sometimes go out. I've got headphone splitters that sometimes go out. I've got this Zoom H4n Pro field recorder that was like
really cool. I don't know what that thing is, but that thing looks cool.
Yeah, and this recorder is like $220, and I'm a teacher. I don't make a ton of money, but I love doing this. And these microphones are like $90 a piece. I've got the boom arm there. I've got Skype software for recording. It just adds up. So any support that you can give, if you feel like it, if you just want to listen, that's totally awesome as well. I love it. So, and you can also hit me up on PayPal. I have a direct PayPal link in the Twitter bio on Classical Ideas Twitter. So if you look at my bio, there's a direct PayPal me link. So if you want to send me any money, woohoo.
Okay, great. So how was that, Greg? Are you okay? You survived the
awesome.
first time on the other side of the
microphone? No, it's really funny. Yeah, it's all good.
All right, those are all my questions for you.
Cool.
So, all right, thanks.